In this lesson, I will be telling you a little bit about partitive articles. But before we get to the notes on that exactly, I want to talk about what we know about articles so far. Articles are those little teeny tiny words in both the French and the English language that seemingly don't make a big difference, except they kind of do, because it's the difference between saying a or an item or the item. So the difference between an indefinite and a definite article is that indefinite articles in English are the words a or an. Basically, they mean that you could have any old item, hence the name indefinite articles. And in French, they translate to two different words, really. It's either un or une, based on whether you are saying a masculine item or a feminine item. Un for masculine, une for feminine. Now, if you happen to have multiple indefinite items, as in you need some items, but it doesn't matter whether it's some books, any old books at all will do, then you use the word des, which is the plural form of indefinite articles. Now, what if you need something specific? That's where the definite articles come in. If you need the specific book or the specific books, you'll need some definite articles to help you out. The word le is the masculine form for definite articles, meaning it's the word the for something that is masculine, like the book, le livre. Again, no rhyme or reason as to why book is masculine. It's just always been that way in the French language. The word la is the word the for feminine items. So if you have something like the chair, it's la chaise. Again, no rhyme and reason to why chair is feminine. Les is the word the if you're saying the for something that is plural, more than one item, like the books, as mentioned earlier. And there's a very special definite article, and that would be L apostrophe if you happen to have an item that starts with a vowel, such as the computer. Ordinateur is actually a masculine word, but of course you can't put a le in front of it without having a double vowel situation, so you use an L apostrophe there instead. So far you know the words for a or an and the words for the. Today we're talking about, though, the words for some. So again, here's your actual notes page. You can see that we backtrack at first on the notes by, again, going over the indefinite articles. This is actually really important to food items because sometimes you want a item or an item or a or an entire food item. This happens a lot whenever you're talking about like a roll or when you're talking about a piece of fruit. You don't often take some of a banana or some of a grapefruit. You tend to eat the whole thing all at once. So you do actually need to remember those indefinite articles when it comes to food so that you can refer to an entire item. So go ahead and jot these down on your notes. I know it's a repeat, but the word for a masculine item, in this section I'd like to use the example of a croissant, is un, un. And again, un croissant would mean a croissant, as in you're going to have the entire croissant all to yourself, and it's going to be delicious. Une gets used whenever you want an entire feminine item. Omelette, the word for omelet, happens to be feminine. So if you're going to take down that whole omelet on your own, then you're going to say une omelette is what you want, because you want an omelet, the whole omelet all to yourself. And if you happen to have a plural item, kind of interesting that in the French language, cereal is a plural item. They don't say cereal singular, they say cereals, which makes sense because usually you don't just have one little flake in your bowl. But if you have something that ends in the letter S or whatever it might be so that it is plural, you're going to use the word des. So if you have something like some cereals, I know that's not how we say it in English, you'll use des. Again, this is all review, but it's important to know because when it comes to food, a lot of times you're talking about an entire item. Give you the example here of je veux un pamplemousse. Je veux are the words for I want. And then if you want the whole grapefruit to yourself, you're going to say, I want a grapefruit, just like in English. And then again in French, you have to consider the fact that a has two different versions. And since grapefruit is masculine, you'll say un pamplemousse. Now, there is one thing I must remind you about, and that is that weird rule that we talked about back in first semester, which is that for whatever reason, the word pas in the French language can never be followed by un or une or des. I know it seems really strange, but we tell that whole story about how when the guy was inventing the French language, he actually got sick to his stomach. It's just my way of helping you remember. But the bottom line is, if you find yourself writing a negative sentence, for example, instead of saying I want a grapefruit, saying I don't want, and putting in a ne pas around the word veut, which is the word want, you cannot say je ne veux pas un pamplemousse. I know it translates word for word to I don't want a grapefruit, but again, those crazy French folks don't like a pas followed by an an une, or a des. Anytime they find themselves writing a sentence where they have pas un, or pas une, or pas deux, or des, it becomes de, de, every single time. So the way you would say I don't want a grapefruit is je ne veux pas de pamplemousse. It's a small exception, but I wanted you to be aware of it. Let's get to the new stuff. Here's your new stuff, and this should actually look fairly familiar. We've seen these contractions with de before. We've talked before about how de and le can never exist together, and so instead they always combine them into the word du. How de and la are perfectly okay, as are de and l apostrophe, but how de and le can never go together and always become de. You've seen these words before, but we weren't using them as partitive articles. Now we are. So all of these D words essentially mean the word some. Du is the word some for something that's masculine. Now this doesn't always work. It's not always an item that you can have some of, but for some items, that's the only word that'll work. For example, with the word butter. You don't often say that you need a butter. You might need a packet of butter, but then you're adding the word packet into your phrase, and that's not what we're saying here. Usually you just talk about needing some butter. Butter happens to be masculine, so you'll put the word du in front of butter when you want to say some for something masculine like butter. For something feminine like jelly, confiture, you'll have to use the word de la. De la means the same thing as du. It still means some, but it's some for feminine items. Again, jelly is one of those things where you don't often ask for a jelly. You typically ask for some jelly. So de la confiture is something that you'll see fairly often. If you happen to have an item that starts with a vowel, and folks, this does not happen often, and sorry that it got cut off right here. It's supposed to say some of an omelet. But in the event that you do have something like omelet that does need to have a sharing aspect to it, where you're only going to have some of it, you actually put a de l apostrophe in front of it. Again, that comes from the idea that you can't technically use de la because then you'd have a double vowel situation. But if it starts with a vowel and you need to say some, de l apostrophe is your word. Finally, this is not anything new. This is actually the same as your indefinite articles. The word some for something plural is de. So that's not anything new. It's kind of interesting that de falls into both the indefinite and the partitive articles categories because of the nature of it. It means some. We learned that last semester, and we're continuing to use it now as part of the partitive articles this semester. So if by chance you need something that's plural, such as some eggs, you'll use des in front of it, such as des œufs. I have an example sentence here for you of je veux des toasts et de la confiture. This is kind of a hard one because toasts doesn't really translate to English. We never talk about eating toasts. That's actually one of the exceptions in our language, that you don't ever add an S to toast. But the bottom line is, if you want more than one piece of toast and you want some toasts, even though it sounds weird, because toasts is plural, you'll have to put a de in front of that. And if you want some jelly to go on that toast, you're going to need the word some for something like jelly, which would be de la confiture. As always, don't forget that if I just went too fast for you, you can always rewind, replay, listen to it all again, and see if maybe it sinks in better the second time. But if you're feeling pretty good about it, go ahead and try out the 2 practice questions. Basically, I've given you 2 sentences where somebody is talking about either what they or somebody else is having for breakfast. Think about what the breakfast item is. Is it an item where you talk about having a or an entire one of that item? Or is it something where you talk about having some of that item? Based on what you say, English-wise counting, go ahead and translate that to French. If you talk about having a or an entire item like that, you're going to be looking at the words un or une based on whether that item is masculine or feminine. If you find yourself thinking to yourself, I usually say that I have some of that item, like some jelly or some butter, like we just discussed. If that's the case, you'll need to think about whether that item is masculine, feminine, plural, or starts with a vowel, and use one of these D words over here. Go ahead and give it a try so that when you come to class, next class, that you're able to discuss these practice activities with somebody else and see how they went. If you try to work on these and it's just not working out for you, make sure that you jot down some questions on your paper so that when you come to class, we can talk about what didn't quite work when it came to the partitive. Good luck!